just in case anyone didn't already know, these are some of my Triumph Tiger Cubs, and I've owned them all for a very long time, especially these three. The 1958 that we see here I bought for £50 back in 1977, when I would have been, well, around about 13 years old I think, or approaching it, and it still had tax and MOT on it when I bought it, that one. The Trials Cub, the bike we're looking at there, was actually this bike when I bought it for £80 in 1979, and there's a story there, but I'll tell that another time. But basically what I thought I'd do here is I'd look at a few basic points, features of the ordinary road going Tiger Cubs, and some of the sports and trials variants. Now, the only genuine original bike that I've got among these three is the Road Cub. That's all correct. It's a 1958 bike with matching frame and engine numbers, and it's all as it should be. Got little 16-inch wheels on it, everything's correct. Little Zenith carburettor, you name it, even the old 6-volt electrical system, the whole lot is as it would have left the factory in 1958. These two are what I call replicas of what they actually appear to be. Now, my Sports Cub isn't actually a Sports Cub. It's not a T20 SS or SL or SH, but it largely mimics one. And we got the 9:1 compression piston in there, the big valve head. Obviously it's a square head on it, so it's got the big port and the big inlet valve, but some of the oval heads had that as well. And over here we've got a Trials replica, and I'm just going to try and sort of discuss a few of the more sort of obvious features that give away whatever type of Tiger Cub you might be looking at, because there's so many little differences. When I was a school kid, it was an ambition of mine to get one of every variation that they made, every variant, and it'd just be more or less impossible to do that. But I mean, we've got a nice little collection here, and these three are all running and on the road. I've got a few more runners as well that need finishing off and getting on the road perhaps one day, but these three are the sort of core of my Tiger Cub collection. So we've got that one there, the 1958, on its 16-inch wheels front and rear, and it's 1 year only. I think 3 or 3.5 gallon fuel tank with the mouth organ badges. It's what they call the wide or flat or chubby cub tank, which appeared on previous models, I think 1956 and 57, basically the same shape tank but with this style of badge. Side on it would have looked like that tank, but looking from above it would have been a lot wider. Anyway, there's all sorts of boring anorak stuff. You could go on indefinitely and still not cover it all. But the Sports Cubs generally had, rather than the 16-inch wheels front and rear, and a little later 17-inch front and rear that the Road Cubs had, the Sports Cubs had 18-inch wheels on the rear and 19-inch on the front, which this one here has got. And they also had what was called the heavyweight fork. Now, the front fork was based on and very similar to those found on some of the larger twins, and far more substantial than the rather spindly little setup we see on the Road Cub. So quite a heavy duty front end on them. Less obvious is the rear subframe, but the giveaway is the bracket there for the high level exhaust pipe, and to a lesser degree the frame loop after the rear shocker working rearwards has got a kick upwards, whereas if we look at the Road Cub, it goes pretty much flat all the way along. And if we look on this side, we see there's no bracket for a high level exhaust pipe, so that's another giveaway. What else goes? The length of the shock absorbers. Now this might not be so apparent looking at them through a camera on video, but the rear shocks on the road cubs, if you look at this portion here, there's two of my fingers there covering that lower section, they are shorter than the sports cub variant, which this side is hidden by the exhaust. Maybe I can do this if I get round here, put my fingers on that one. Hopefully it might just be possible to see that that is a good bit longer. Also, the swing arm is wider, and you have these little gusset plates, sort of outrigger plates, to support the lower rear shock absorber mounting, which again you don't have on the road cub. The Trials variants and Scrambles variants shared lots of sort of features, as you know, appearance wise with the sports cubs. They had the heavyweight forks, same as on the sports cub, and the 18-inch rear wheel, 19 on the front. I've got a 21 on this. This was put on a long time ago. I think some of the competition cubs back in the day probably had a 21-inch front wheel as well, but don't quote me on that one. The wide swing arm, obviously, the outrigger brackets to support the rear shocks if there was a bit of a bumpy landing after doing a jump, I suppose, in the scramble or trials or whatever. And the oil tank, almost identical to the one on my 1958 cub. Later road cubs that had the bikini panels actually had the filler cap on their oil tank around about here, but pre-bikini panels, that's what you had. Now if we look at this, it's the same shape as what the sports cub and the trials cub have got, but it doesn't have the frothing tower on it, and that again tells you that that is a sports or trials or competition cub oil tank there that we got. Folding crank kickstart is another competition item, although this one's been butchered. It should have actually had a spline shaft in there, but that wore out years ago, and I managed to cut an ordinary kickstart shaft with a cotter pin and get someone to weld the top half rather crudely of what was my splined kickstart pedal to that, but it works, does the job. Anyway, we're looking at this engine's a very late one. It's a side points engine, square barrel and head. Now that was the sort of last incarnation of the Tiger Cub engine, where you got the big inlet valve, big inlet port, and generally they were considered to be far more robust than the earlier engines because they had ball main bearings on both sides of the crankshaft and a roller big end. And certainly they're a tough little engine. This is the same type of engine, but obviously I've got an oval cylinder barrel on it, but it's got a square head, so that's fine. And the early engine here, this one has the points in that little mushroom shaped housing there, often referred to as a distributor, and it's got a plain timing side bush, and originally it would have had a plain big end, but it's got an alpha roller big end in it, this, which I got put in there I think well over 40 years ago actually now, so not too worried about this one anyway. Now the differences that you can't see so much, obviously there's what's called a standard gearbox in this one, standard ratios. I've also got standard ratios in this one, although a sports cub would have close ratios where first, second and third would be a little bit higher than you'd find on a road cub, put in third a lot closer to fourth to help keep an engine on the boil when you're giving it some stick. But I've just got the standard normal road going ratios in that one. However, I have got the wide ratio trials cluster in this one, and you get first, second and third all quite low, and then quite a jump up to top gear to give you a good road speed in spite of having 3 low gears for off-road. And also I've got a 54 tooth rear sprocket there on the trials bike, 17 tooth gearbox sprocket as I've said before, rather than the genuine 16 that it would have had, thankfully. This one's got 17 teeth on the front, driving 48 on the rear, if I remember rightly. And this one, obviously because we've got a dinky little 16-inch wheel on the rear of it, we've got a 18 tooth gearbox sprocket driving a 46. So that gives slightly higher gearing to the rear wheel to make up for the size of the rear wheel, and allows the thing to cover the ground respectably. Now, I haven't brought any camshafts out because it'd be difficult to show them and see the difference on film probably, but here are 3 pistons, and hopefully we'll be picking that up. But that's the 7-to-1 piston, that's the 9-to-1 piston, and that's the 10-to-1 piston, the holy grail of Tiger Cub pistons. Now, I haven't actually got an engine with one of those in running yet, but I've got one if I feel like it. But what I have got, I've got 7-to-1 in this one on a 60 thou or 1.5mm overbore, so rather than it having an actual 7-to-1 compression ratio, we'll probably well the other side of 7.5-to-1 on this. Give it a little bit more punch and kick in the pants when you open the throttle. I've got the 9-to-1 piston in this one, and if anyone saw my ride on it the other day after me dragging it out of hibernation, in spite of it not quite running right, I think I've got fuel supply issues possibly. It did run very well, and I'm sure that it would have been noticeable how much more responsive this engine is to the throttle to that one, and that's largely thanks to the 9-to-1 piston, because I haven't got the sports camshaft in there. I've only got the standard camshaft as I have in that bike and that bike. I have got some sports or R camshafts, and one day I might try fitting one, but I've got to say I'm quite happy with how this goes with the 9-to-1 piston and the standard camshaft. So this machine here, again, we've got a 7-to-1 piston in there. So I've got 2 of these. We've got that piston, this bike here, and this bike here, and one has got the 9-to-1, which is that one there. So like I say, you'd never know really unless you rode the bikes and knew what to expect from them. Hopefully the camera will pick them up, but I'm not going to try and show camshafts because I don't think there's much point in that anyway, and they've all got the same camshafts in any case. But that's a little bit about my 3 Tiger Cubs, and let's say I bought that one for £50 in 1977. I bought that one for £80 in 1979. And we'll come to how this even came into being another time, because I think that's another story in itself entirely. But I just thought I'd cover a little bit some of the distinguishing features there between the different types. And another one obviously is things like the tinware. Now this, what they call fully valanced rear mudguard on the 58, that was unique to the 1958 bike. 57s were shallower. 59, the bikini bikes, the mudguard stopped about here and it just had a flat sort of bit of channel sort of metal plate thing there. So that's quite unique, as is the tank for 1958. And then like I say, the sports variants, they had so many differences, different mudguards, different rear subframes, different forks, as I've already said, so I won't repeat myself too much. But there's some of the differences and what sets them apart from each other. And another thing to sort of consider actually is that Triumph Terrier just before them started it all. Then you got the Tiger Cub, then you got the BSA C15, and of course BSA owned Triumph, so they nabbed the design for the C15, which evolved into the C25 and B25 Starfires and Barracudas, and even larger machines like the B40 and the B44 and even the B50. But they're all based on the Terrier and the Tiger Cub, and even the gearboxes in these actually resemble the gearboxes used in the Triumph 350 and 500 unit twins and the BSA A50 and A65 500 and 650 twins. So the little Terrier and Tiger Cub really did make their mark and made an impression on designers, and little features of them can be found in many other British bikes that followed. So really a very underrated and very successful design, and I've got to say, once they get under your skin, there's nothing to do other than fall for them really, and they've been a big part of my life for a very long time, and I love these little things. You don't need a big bike to have a fantastic bike, as I found out with my Triumph Tiger Cubs.